It was a bright Saturday morning in Ohio, the kind of morning that usually felt calm and predictable. John Miller, 70 years old and retired from decades of steady office work, stepped out onto his porch with a mug of coffee in hand. He could hear children laughing down the block, the distant sound of a lawn mower, and the rustle of leaves carried by the early autumn breeze. His 7-year-old granddaughter Emma had come over for the weekend, and she was already bouncing a ball in the driveway, calling out for him to join her. John smiled, set down his coffee, and walked toward her, but as he bent to pick up the ball, a sharp cramp gripped his right calf. The sudden pain was so intense it made him grab onto the porch rail for balance. Emma's laughter quickly shifted into concern. "Grandpa, are you okay?" she asked, wide-eyed. He forced a chuckle, patting his leg. "Oh, it's nothing, sweet pea, just my age reminding me I'm not 20 anymore." He tried to play it off, but inside he felt frustrated. This wasn't the first time. For months now, the cramps had been sneaking up on him, while getting out of bed in the middle of the night, while standing after a long dinner with friends, even during short walks to the mailbox. John eased himself into a lawn chair, pretending to rest, but the truth was the ache lingered. As Emma went back to bouncing the ball, he looked down at his leg and sighed. "Why does this keep happening?" he muttered under his breath. He remembered his father complaining about the same thing years ago, always chalking it up to just getting old. Was that all there was to it? At that moment, he realized how much these little pains were starting to shape his daily life. He loved spending time outdoors, playing catch with Emma, or joining his neighbors for evening strolls around the block. Yet every time the cramps hit, they stole those simple joys away. And as much as he tried to ignore it, he couldn't help but wonder if this was what the rest of his retirement would look like, slowing down, step by step, not because he wanted to, but because his legs wouldn't let him do otherwise. Still, a part of him refused to accept that explanation. There had to be something more than just age. After all, he had always believed that growing older didn't mean giving up living fully. He took a slow sip of his now cool coffee, listening to the ball thump against the driveway, and thought, maybe there's an answer I just haven't found yet. The cramp that morning left John uneasy long after it faded. By the time Emma had gone inside to help her grandmother with pancakes, he was still rubbing his calf, replaying the moment in his mind. It wasn't just a nuisance anymore, it was becoming a pattern he could no longer laugh off. That week he finally picked up the phone and scheduled a visit with his family doctor. At the clinic, John sat in the small exam room, the paper on the table crinkling beneath him. Dr. Stevens, a kind woman in her early 50s who had been his physician for years, walked in with a smile. "So, John, what brings you in today?" John chuckled nervously. "Well, Doc, I guess I'm getting to that age where my legs like to remind me they're still around. Cramps, bad ones, mostly in my calves, sometimes at night, sometimes when I stand up too quickly. Nearly dropped my granddaughter's ball the other day." Dr. Stevens nodded, listening carefully as she tapped notes into her tablet. "You're not alone, John. Leg cramps are very common, especially as we get older. But let's not just blame age. There are a few reasons why they happen." John leaned forward, curious. "First," she began, "your muscles need certain minerals, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, to contract and relax properly. If your diet doesn't supply enough, cramps can creep in. Second, dehydration is a big factor. Muscles are like sponges. When they don't have enough water, they tighten. And third, circulation can play a role. If you sit for long periods or don't stretch, blood flow slows down." John frowned. "So you're saying it's not just me getting old?" "Exactly," she replied. "Age makes us more vulnerable, but the root causes are often things you can actually change. With the right foods and hydration, many people see huge improvements." John let out a low whistle. "Well, that's good to hear. My dad always said cramps were just part of getting older, so I figured I was stuck with them." Dr. Stevens smiled. "That's a common belief, but it's not the whole story. Think of it this way, your body is like a car. If the oil runs low or the tires aren't inflated, the ride feels rough. But fix those small things, and suddenly it runs smoothly again." As John left the clinic, prescription slip in hand, not for medication but for simple lifestyle changes, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he wasn't doomed to hobble through retirement after all. Maybe, with the right adjustments, he could keep up with Emma in the driveway, join his neighbors for their evening walks, and even get back to fishing trips he used to love. Walking out into the crisp air, John thought about Dr. Stevens' words. Potassium, calcium, magnesium, water. It sounded almost too simple. Still, he knew he had to try. He wasn't ready to give up his active life just yet. That evening, John sat in his favorite recliner with a blanket over his knees, still mulling over what Dr. Stevens had told him. The television flickered with the evening news, but he hardly noticed. For years, he had accepted the cramps as a natural part of aging, just like gray hair and slower mornings. His father used to laugh about it, shrugging whenever his calves seized up. That's just life after 60. John had believed it too, never questioning it, but now he wasn't so sure. The doctor's words echoed in his head. It's not just age, John. It's often things you can change. Later that week, at a neighborhood gathering, he brought it up with his friend Harold, who was a year younger and still an avid golfer. Harold, do you ever get those nasty cramps in your legs? John asked. Harold chuckled, shaking his head. Not really, maybe once in a blue moon. Why? John frowned. I get them all the time. I figured it was just because I'm older now. Harold raised an eyebrow. Older, John, we're practically the same age. The difference is probably diet. You know me, I eat bananas every morning before golf, and my wife makes me drink more water than a camel. Annoys me half the time, but maybe she's onto something. That caught John off guard. Here was Harold, nearly his age, still swinging golf clubs and walking the course without limping. And he didn't seem to have the same problems at all. Could it really come down to something as simple as food and hydration? That night, John lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation. For the first time, he felt a mix of frustration and determination. Frustration because he had wasted years believing cramps were inevitable. Determination because maybe, just maybe, he still had a say in the matter. The next morning, as Emma came running into the kitchen asking for pancakes again, John decided to do something different. Instead of reaching for his usual toast and black coffee, he pulled a banana from the fruit bowl. Emma wrinkled her nose. "Grandpa, you never eat bananas," John grinned. "Well, maybe it's time I start," Emma giggled. "If you keep eating those, you'll turn into Banana Grandpa," John laughed, peeling the fruit. The name stuck with him, but so did the realization the cramps weren't just about getting old, they were a signal his body needed something more. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't just a victim of age. He was a participant in his own health story. The very next week, John made a small but deliberate change. Instead of his usual quick slice of toast with coffee, he started adding a banana to his breakfast. At first, it felt almost silly. How could one piece of fruit make a difference? But Dr. Stevens' words and Harold's brag about his golf stamina kept echoing in his head. Emma noticed right away. One morning, as she watched him peel the banana, she tilted her head and grinned. "Grandpa, you really are turning into Banana Grandpa," she teased. John chuckled, playing along. "Well, kiddo, if it keeps me from hopping around the living room at 2 in the morning, I'll take the nickname." What surprised him most wasn't the banana itself, but the awareness it sparked. Soon he started thinking about other potassium-rich foods. On his next grocery trip, he tossed sweet potatoes into the cart, a food he hadn't eaten in years. That evening, his wife roasted them with a drizzle of olive oil and a sprinkle of cinnamon. John took one bite and raised his eyebrows. "I forgot how good these are." He even gave avocados another try, something he had avoided for years because he thought they were too trendy. One Saturday, he mashed half an avocado onto whole grain toast, sprinkled it with a little salt and pepper, and admitted, though only to himself, that it wasn't half bad. By the second week, John began to notice subtle changes. The cramps weren't gone completely, but they weren't hitting as often, and when they did, the pain didn't linger as long. During one of his evening walks with the neighbors, he realized he had gone farther without having to stop and rub his calf. "Feeling better?" Harold asked, noticing John's quicker pace. John smirked. "Let's just say the produce aisle is becoming my new best friend." The humor helped, but underneath it all, John felt something deeper: control. For months, maybe even years, he had accepted leg cramps as an unchangeable part of life. Now, with a banana at breakfast and sweet potatoes on his dinner plate, he felt like he was finally pushing back. And it wasn't just his body noticing. Emma, ever observant, announced at dinner one night, "Grandpa walks faster now." "I had to jog to catch up." The whole table laughed, but John felt a quiet pride settle in his chest. These weren't just cramps disappearing, these were pieces of his life coming back, pieces he thought he had lost forever. John's small dietary changes had given him hope. The cramps weren't gone, but they came less often, and he no longer dreaded his evening walks. Still, Dr. Stevens' words echoed in his head. "Don't forget calcium." The next Saturday, John stood in the dairy aisle at the grocery store, staring at rows of yogurt cups and cartons of milk. He hadn't bought yogurt in years. Truth be told, he had always been a little skeptical. He thought of it as diet food, or something only kids and young women grabbed for lunch. With a sigh, he picked up a container of plain Greek yogurt, turning it over in his hand like it was some exotic item. When he got home, his wife laughed. "Yogurt, you, what happened to the man who said dairy was only good for cereal?" John smirked. "Well, apparently it's good for my legs too." Doctor's orders. That evening, he reluctantly spooned a serving into a bowl and drizzled a little honey on top. To his surprise, it wasn't bad at all: creamy, tangy, satisfying. Emma peeked over the counter, giggling. Grandpa's eating yogurt, next thing you know, he'll be drinking smoothies. Over the next few days, John experimented. He added a slice of cheddar to his sandwich, poured himself a small glass of fortified orange juice in the mornings, and even tried tofu when his wife slipped it into a stir-fry. Bit by bit, he found ways to add calcium without feeling like he was changing everything. 2 weeks later, he noticed another difference. The nagging cramps that used to wake him in the middle of the night had grown less frequent. One morning, after sleeping through without interruption, he sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, and realized he couldn't remember the last time he had jumped out of bed clutching his calf. Later that week, his neighbor Harold called to invite him to a short hike on a local trail. John hesitated. He hadn't agreed to something like that in years. But then he thought about the bananas, the sweet potatoes, the yogurt, and how much better his legs had been feeling. "You know what?" John said, surprising even himself. "Count me in." When Saturday came, John laced up his sneakers and joined Harold. The trail wasn't long, but it had a few uphill stretches that would have stopped him cold just a month earlier. This time, though, he pushed through without cramping. At the top, he stood catching his breath, looking out at the wide Ohio landscape, and smiled. It wasn't just the view that felt refreshing, it was the realization that small choices at the dinner table were giving him pieces of his life back. After the hike with Harold, John felt like he was turning a corner. The potassium and calcium changes were paying off, and for the first time in years, he was sleeping through the night without being jolted awake by cramps. But Dr. Stevens' list had one more mineral, magnesium. At first, John rolled his eyes. Another nutrient, how many do I need? But as he read more, he realized magnesium wasn't just one more thing. It played a role in muscle relaxation, blood pressure, and even energy levels. Maybe it was the missing piece. The truth was, John had never paid much attention to magnesium. His daily routine had always included white bread sandwiches and the occasional bag of chips, vegetables. Sure, but usually as an afterthought. Spinach, almonds, whole wheat bread, they were all foods he'd overlooked for decades. On his next trip to the store, John hesitated in front of the bread aisle. His hand reached for the familiar white loaf, but then he stopped. Instead, he picked up a loaf of whole wheat. "Let's see what all the fuss is about," he muttered. That evening, he built himself a sandwich with turkey, cheese, and the new whole wheat bread. It tasted different, heavier, nuttier, but not unpleasant. A few days later, his wife tossed a bag of fresh spinach into the grocery cart, and John found himself sautéing it with garlic as a side dish. To his surprise, it quickly became one of his favorites. Snacking changed too. Instead of grabbing chips, he started keeping a jar of almonds on the counter. At first, it felt like a sacrifice, but after a while, he realized the crunch was just as satisfying, and he didn't feel as sluggish afterward. By the third week of these changes, John noticed something striking. His evening walks had grown longer, and he could mow the lawn without stopping to stretch his calves. One Saturday afternoon, Emma challenged him to a race across the backyard. Laughing, he jogged after her, and to his amazement, he kept up. "Grandpa, you're faster than before," Emma squealed, collapsing into giggles as she reached the porch steps. John bent over, hands on his knees, breathing hard but smiling. For once, there was no stabbing cramp to cut the moment short. That night, as he sat on the porch sipping water, John thought about how small changes, switching bread, adding spinach, snacking on almonds, were transforming not just his body but his confidence. It wasn't about being young again. It was about reclaiming little pieces of life he thought he had lost. By now, John felt proud of the changes he had made. Potassium, calcium, magnesium, he had worked them into his meals almost without thinking. The cramps were fewer and farther between, and he was beginning to trust his legs again. But there was one last thing Dr. Stevens had stressed that he hadn't taken seriously: hydration. He thought he was fine in that department. After all, he drank his morning coffee, maybe a glass of iced tea at lunch, and sometimes a soda at dinner. Water, that was for joggers and kids carrying plastic bottles everywhere. At least that's what he told himself. One sunny Sunday, John joined his family for a picnic at a nearby park. The day was warm, the kind that made the air shimmer above the grass. They grilled burgers, played frisbee, and laughed as Emma chased bubbles across the lawn. John felt good, better than he had in a long time, but midway through a short walk around the lake, it hit him. A sharp cramp seized his left calf, locking the muscle so tightly he nearly stumbled. He grabbed onto a bench, gritting his teeth. The pain was worse than usual, and this time it refused to let go. Emma ran to his side, worried. "Grandpa, are you okay?" He forced a smile, sweat beading on his forehead. "Just give me a minute." His wife handed him her water bottle. "Drink this, now." John took a few long gulps, the cool water soothing his dry throat. Within minutes, the cramp began to ease. He sat there shaken, realizing how close he'd been to collapsing in front of his family. On the drive home, the truth sank in. Coffee and soda don't count. My body needs real water. He remembered Dr. Stevens saying, "Muscles are like sponges, without enough water they tighten." He had shrugged it off at the time, but now he understood exactly what she meant. The very next day, John filled a reusable water bottle and carried it everywhere. At first, it felt awkward, like he was trying to be trendy, but soon it became second nature. He kept one in the car, one by his recliner, and one on the porch where he liked to sit in the evenings. Within weeks, the difference was undeniable. The stubborn cramps that still lingered after all his dietary changes began to fade almost entirely. His walks grew longer, he felt steadier, lighter. One evening after mowing the lawn, John sat on the porch and took a long sip from his water bottle. Emma came over, plopped into the chair beside him, and said, "See, Grandpa. I told you water's good, even I drink it all the time." John laughed, raising the bottle like a toast. "Well, kiddo, you were right. Guess it took me 70 years to figure that out." A month after that difficult picnic, John felt like a new man. His pantry looked different: bananas in a basket, whole wheat bread on the counter, almonds in a jar. A water bottle was practically glued to his side. He wasn't perfect, but he was consistent, and consistency was paying off. So when Harold invited him on a longer hike, a 3-mile trail through a state park, John hesitated only for a moment. In the past, he would have laughed and politely declined, blaming his legs or making up an excuse. This time, something inside him said, "Why not?" Saturday morning arrived crisp and cool. John laced up his sneakers, tucked a water bottle into his backpack, and met Harold at the trailhead. The path wound upward through tall oaks, sunlight streaming between the branches. In the past, even the first incline would have made him stop, clutching his calf. But as he climbed, his legs felt steady, strong. Halfway through, Harold turned and asked, "You doing okay back there?" John grinned. "Better than okay. Keep moving before I pass you." They both laughed, the sound echoing through the trees. At one point, the trail opened to a clearing overlooking a wide stretch of rolling hills. John stopped, not because of pain, but to take in the view. The air smelled of pine, the breeze cool on his face. He realized with a rush of gratitude that he hadn't thought about cramps once that morning. His body felt like his own again. Later that afternoon, back at home, Emma came bounding up the porch steps. "Grandpa, did you go hiking?" she asked, eyes wide. "I sure did," John said, lowering himself into a chair with a satisfied sigh. 3 miles. "Not a single cramp," Emma gasped dramatically. 3 miles, Grandpa, that's like forever." She threw her arms around him. "You're stronger than me," John chuckled, hugging her tight. "Not stronger, sweetheart. Just smarter with what I eat and drink." That night, as he sat on the porch with his wife, sipping cool water and watching the fireflies dance across the yard, John felt a quiet joy settle over him. The journey hadn't been about becoming young again. It had been about reclaiming the freedom to live fully, to say yes instead of no, to keep up with the people he loved. And for the first time in years, he wasn't worried about what his legs might do tomorrow. He was simply looking forward to where they would take him next. The following weekend, John and his family gathered for Sunday dinner, a tradition they had kept for years. The table was filled with roasted chicken, fresh vegetables, and a big bowl of sweet potatoes, now a regular guest on the menu. Emma sat next to him, chattering about school, while his wife passed around glasses of fortified orange juice. As the meal wound down, John leaned back in his chair, listening to the laughter and the gentle clinking of silverware. For so long, he had been distracted by the fear of cramps sneaking up and stealing these moments. Tonight, that fear was gone. After dinner, they all took a slow stroll to the park down the street. The evening air was soft, the sky painted in pinks and oranges as the sun slipped low. Emma held John's hand as they walked, skipping every few steps, tugging him along. And to his delight, he didn't need to ask for a break. His legs carried him easily, smoothly, almost proudly. When they reached the playground, John sat on a bench, watching his granddaughter swing high into the twilight. He took a sip from the water bottle he now carried everywhere and smiled. Life felt different, not because he had become young again, but because he had reclaimed something he thought was gone forever: freedom. He turned to his wife, who was watching Emma with the same soft smile. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think this was just old age catching up with me, but it wasn't age, it was me not giving my body what it needed. I wish I'd known sooner." She squeezed his hand. "Well, you know now. And that's what matters." John sat there, soaking in the simple beauty of the moment, the laughter of his family, the colors of the sunset, the strength in his legs that allowed him to be fully present. He realized that the changes hadn't just given him relief from cramps, they had given him back his confidence, his joy, and his sense of possibility. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Emma ran back to the bench and climbed onto his lap. "Grandpa," she whispered, "promise me you'll always walk with me." John kissed the top of her head and nodded. "Always, sweetheart, as long as these legs will carry me, and I'm taking good care of them now." And with that, the story wasn't just about leg cramps anymore. It was about hope, about the power of small choices, and about the simple truth that it's never too late to take back your health.